Hi everyone, this is Lauren coming at you from the Break Zone with another deck tech video. This one going over the Mono Win deck that was piloted by Shouta Hikokubo over at the World Championship. So I talked about this deck a little bit when I was discussing the Final Fantasy Trading Card Game News episode, like the last two episodes, the one going over a couple of the lists as well as the one going over the results. And I really like this deck. I'd like to thank Pedro from Band's Final Fantasy Corner for getting this list to me so that I could take a look at it, analyze it, and show it to you guys. So hopefully you'll have a good time. So the reason why I have a picture there with all the costs is because one of our viewers actually mentioned that they wanted to take a quick look at what the deck, the cost of each card looks like. And I'll post a link in the video description so that you can go ahead and check out the full deck list and maybe check out some of the other stats as well on FFDecks, as well as maybe do some other things with it. So I'll move on to actually showing you the deck and going over each card. So hopefully if you need to take a look at that, you'll be able to click on the link to FFDecks and get that done. So this deck focuses on the efficiency game. It wants to get to 5 backups, hopefully have 1 or more breakable ones, so that in case you need to take care of some other things, you're not locked out, because part of the game is that you can only have a maximum of 5 backups in play at a time. But this deck wants to get to 5, so eventually you kind of lock yourself out. But with breakable backups, you'll be able to open up slots and play the other ones that you need at a later time. So the first card we're going to go over for the forwards is 3 CP Bards. You have 1 copy of it. It's a finisher. And keep in mind that every single forward in your deck has a different job. So getting to 3 or 5 jobs with this Bard is not too difficult. And since I mentioned it's a finisher, you set this up over the long run and eventually it pays off. So just in case your opponent takes out your 5 CP Bards, because you're playing 3 copies of that one, and that's the main one you'll be playing actually. If it gets broken and you happen to have 4 other forwards, this Bard turns into a 3 CP, 9,000 power, haste, first strike, brave, that can attack twice a turn. So when I say finisher, he is one hell of a finisher. Alright, next up we're going to go over Shouta. And this deck wants to play 2 or more forwards on the field. And this will protect, Shouta will be able to protect you from board wipes such as Shantotto or Exodus. And Shouta can protect herself from Dataluma, Fusoya, Alcid, Cactuar, things like that, because she can't take any damage from summons or abilities, so she's quite good. Next up we've got Shilinka. That's part of the damage engine of this deck, the Final Fantasy Crystal Chronicles. And if you play a Shilinka after Barbarisha, you can break forwards, even if your opponent has one of those pesky backups that gives all of their forwards plus 1,000 power. And it also makes Alanalem, I'm going to have to get used to saying that name, it's a little bit difficult, Alanalem, deal 3,000 damage whenever it dulls. And if you party attack with Shilinka and Yuri, you can break a forward. Alright. Next up we've got Moogle. So as I mentioned, you want a lot of forwards, so that's another forward there, and it helps you stall out the game so that if you need to build out a little more and they're getting very aggressive on you, then you get to draw a card, play Moogle, they do something to break it, you get to draw another card, move your game state forward, get a lot of cards out of it, stall them out to some extent. And once you get to the mid to late game, if you're playing against a water deck and they happen to play Fanfrey, you don't mind sacrificing a Moogle, because you'll be able to draw a card out of it. So it's not exactly a Layla Viking or anything like that, but you still get a little, it still stings a little bit less when you sacrifice a Moogle to a Fanfrey. Alright, next up we're going to go over Zidane. And Zidane has protection from Dataluma, Fusoya, Alcid, and Sid Alstein, some of the major cards that are played in the current meta. And the discard effect puts pressure on your opponent. So your opponent cannot save their big force for future turns, such as Layla Vikings trying to save a Nidhogg or something like that. You'll be able to rip that card straight out of their hand with Zidane, and whenever it attacks, you can react whenever it forces a discard out of your opponent's hand, and that's the only card that actually causes a discard from your opponent. So it'll be able to react to itself, Alanalem, or any dull or frozen character that you may have. Okay. Next up, we have Barbarisha. That combos really well with Shilinka, Alanalem, and Yuri to break forwards. And we also have Vada, who is basically free when you have 4 backups. And on stream, it was part of a combo that Shouta was able to pull off against Matthew Komodo. That was a hell of a match. And Shouta was able to play 18 CPs worth of cards in one turn, which is ridiculous when you think about it. Most players think about, what, Nidhogg, and 9 CP is a lot. So 18 is twice that amount, which is just wow. Like, I mean, you gotta check it out. It was awesome. Alright, next up we got Cecil. I love this card. I think it's a powerhouse. If you don't have this card, keep in mind that it is available in the Villains and Heroes 2-player starter deck. That's available on our sponsor site, MagicDeckGames.com, for what I think it's like 25 bucks. You'll get 3 copies of Cecil as well as so many other cards. There's a lot of really powerful starters that you want to put into your collection, into your decks, as well as some other amazing cards that give you so much value, from Fat Chocobo, Genesis, Vivi, Amon. There's just, I can't even remember all of them, but there's just so many cards. If you don't have a copy, I highly suggest that you buy a copy of the Villains and Heroes deck. So yeah, whoops, almost forgot to talk about the card actually. So Cecil, you can count it as a pseudo 3 CP forward because you get to reactivate 2 characters when you play it, and you could choose to reactivate backups that you use to pay for Cecil, or you can reactivate adult characters, frozen, or even after they attack, or even Alanalem if you want to use the damaging ability one more time. It is a beast at 10,000 power that has a protection from opponent's abilities when you're at 5 or 6 points of damage. And the only other cards I can think off the top of my head that have a stat line that high, 10,000 power, I mean, there's a few more obviously, but that are that easy to kind of get to that point that you don't have to depend on many other factors to get that big, would be something like Minerva or Feral Chaos, and we don't see them played that much. I mean, there's other ways to get, let's say, like a Knight, for example, to be quite powerful, but Cecil on its own can easily get to 10,000 power. And it was a huge factor on stream. If you haven't checked it out, like I mentioned, I'll put a link down below so you could see some of the top players in the world take each other on, and Cecil definitely made a very good showing. Alright, next up we've got Bartz, and well, it's amazing mono wind, and every single one of your characters counts as wind, including Yuri, because Yuri counts as every character except for Dark, so that does include wind. It's a great EX burst in case you're playing against something like Mono Ice, or if you want to, if your forwards are dull or frozen before your attack phase, you could play a Bartz, reactivate them so you could attack with them. Or even after you attack with them, you could go ahead and play Bartz, reactivate them so that they're available for blocks. And it is technically a free forward to play at 9,000 power when you play 5 backups, and it's on turn. Alright, next up we've got Yuri, who's one of the best cards in Opus 7. That's part of the damage engine from Final Fantasy Crystal Chronicles. There's just so many great options to pick from when you look at the abilities on it. I mean, from being able to force opposing forwards to lose all their abilities in the end of turn. A Duel and Freeze can be quite relevant when you're attacking as well, if they don't have anything where you have to remove their abilities. Being able to deal 2 instances of 4,000 damage is huge. And you know what, if you're ahead, why not just draw a card? That's not even, and if you consider that it is that the drawing a card is considered one of the weaker effects on this card, according to like what people say or what people have mentioned, and that's something that I've heard over at the RBA Returners podcast. Drawing a card is still really, really good. And Yuri technically has protection from Al Cid if you play correctly, as long as you play Yuri and you have 2 wind backups available active. Then you can go ahead and duel Yuri 2 backups to draw a card if they target it with Al Cid. Okay, and by doing that, you'll be able to fizzle the effect of Al Cid. Alright, so now we're going to go over some of the summons, starting off with Chocomog. It's an EX burst, so that's always good, at only 1 CP, so that's really effective. But you look at the targets that you search for, and there's not that many, but you can get Moogle as well as Moogle 11. And so if you don't have Moogle 11 on the field at the time, you can go ahead and get it. And if you already have it, then all of a sudden you can turn up 2 backups, Mogul 11 as well as another win backup, into a searcher for any card. But keep in mind that when you search for a card, you must reveal it to your opponent. Okay. Next up, we've got Chaos Walker of the Wheel, who works amazingly well with Zidane. You can go ahead, attack with Zidane, look at their hand, choose a forward from it, and make them discard it. After that, you can Chaos Walker whatever forward they have on the field if you feel that it's safe to do so. And after that, you'll trade their most dangerous forward on the field for something that's a lot more manageable. Okay, next up we've got Diablos. Haven't seen this one played too much, but since you'll probably have 4 or 5 backups out, you can treat it as a pseudo 1 CP summon that turns opposing forwards into 4,000 power forwards. And it's a great combat trick, and you get to cycle your cards. I really like this card in decks that don't rely so much on having a higher power curve on all their forwards to deal combat damage. Okay. And last but not least for the summons, we've got Diablos, who is one of the reasons why you play Wind. I mean, this card is just so amazing. It is the bane of 5 CP forwards from Cloud of Darkness, Camelot, Cecil, or Sid Alstein. This card just does it all. And being able to reactivate your forwards, for example, if they were dull or frozen for some reason, is good. But for the most part, people tend to use this card. I mean, it's the effect that I've seen. The effects I've seen used the most would be to choose one forward of cost 5 or more and break it, followed by activating all backups you control. Okay, so next we're going to go over some of the backups, or actually all of the backups, starting off with Mogul 11. That's personally one of my favorite backups, in my opinion. It's one of the best, and it's one of the best searchers as well. It's 2 CP, and while it's a unique character, any further copies of Mogul 11 you can turn into anything from early game. If you need a backup, you can turn into another backup, and you get to the mid to late game, maybe you get that Diablos or a forward, whatever you need, you'll be able to get it. Okay. Next up we have Alanalem. That's part of the damage engine that I mentioned from Final Fantasy Crystal Chronicles that combos with Barbarisha. As long as you have either Shalinka or Yuri out, you'll be able to take out forwards even if your opponent has a plus 1000 power backup. And you can reactivate it with Nono, Vada, Zidane, 5 CP Barts, Cecil, 5 CP Diablos. There's just so many ways that you can combo it off. And when you have Shalinka on the field, Alanalem will be able to deal 3,000 damage every time you duel it, which is a lot. And if you have both of them, then 3,000 damage to every single forward on your opponent's field without targeting them. That is huge. Okay, next up we have Archer. And while it's a 2 CP backup, it's been staple since Opus 1, but even in this meta, it's quite relevant because it breaks Fusoya, as well as plus 1000 power backup that your opponents might play, since I mean, you play Maria, and when you play Mono Wind, Maria does cost 4, so it takes a little bit more, it slows you down a little bit to actually play it out. So while most of your forwards are on curve, there's a few a little bit underneath, like Mogul or Zidane, for example, are a little bit beneath the curve, as well as 5 CP Cecil if you're not on 5 or 6 points of damage. So using Archer to break those plus 1000 power backups might just win out a trade. For example, if they're attacking with 9,000 power forward into your Bards that they don't think you're going to block, all of a sudden I mean, it's pretty obvious, it's pretty telegraphed that you have an Archer, but it should be a strong enough deterrent to hold things off and let you get to your very powerful late game. Alright, next up we've got White Mage that had a huge impact on Worlds. It counters Vikings, Gladiator, Lena from getting the 2 CP forward onto the field, or even a Rise, as well as Devout, Miner, and Minfilia. And we saw a lot of Miners and Minfilia in Worlds, so this card is quite potent. 2 copies of it I think is great, as long as you have either a card in hand or active backup including itself. Keep in mind that the White Mage ability does not require you to duel it, so even if White Mage is dull, you can still use its ability as long as you can produce at least 1 CP for it. Alright, next up we've got Alaria, who's an EX burst, so that's always good. 3 CP backup, so that curves you out, kind of bridges you into your other plays, and searches for your combo pieces that you need oh so much. She's a really good card in this deck, especially since you rely so much on the Final Fantasy Crystal Chronicles portion of the deck. I mean, you don't rely on it, but it definitely is a big part of your deck. Okay, next up we've got Nono, who combos with Alanalem to, especially when Alanalem is able to deal 2 to 3,000 damage to opposing forwards. That's really good. And even if you don't have Sherlinka or Yuri to use Alanalem like that way, you can go ahead and, let's say, play a forward or play a summon before you attack, and when you attack with one of your forwards, you can go ahead and start reactivating your backup so that you can play more cards in your second main phase. And last but not least, we got Maria, because most of your forwards are 6 to 7k, and there's a few at 8 to 9k. But keep in mind that Archer cannot take care of opposing Marias. So if you're in a mirror match, you might want to play Maria. If you're in a mirror match, you might want to consider playing Maria if they play their own. Otherwise, all your forwards will be just a little bit too small to deal with theirs. So hopefully you like this deck. If you have any comments, questions, suggestions, feel free to add them down below. I will try to address them, obviously. I'd like to give a shout out to Ban's Final Fantasy Corner on Facebook, because without him and all the news that he provides us from the Japanese meta, I wouldn't have been able to get this deck list. Also, thanks to our sponsor, MagicTechGames.com, that sells Final Fantasy trading card game singles as well as Magic, and should be selling Pokemon in the near future, all singles. And we do have some things to give away. So when we hit 800, 900, or 1,000 subscribers, we'll pick a subscriber at random, and they will get to pick between some of the things that were provided by MagicTechGames.com, such as they'll get to pick one of them, and we'll send it to them, such as what's it called? Iconic Masters Horizon Canopy. That's like a $50 to $60 value. We also have Mox Amber from Dominaria. That's about, I think it's like a $10 to $15 value. Card sleeves, a 60 pack. Lightning plushie. Got her a little while back at Gen Con, I think. Oh, actually, was it Gen Con? I think it was PAX East, actually. And last but not least, we've got Toronto Crystal Cup Shiva deck box that was autographed by Saru Kageyama, producer of the game. And I think we're going to do some artifact giveaway too. We've been doing a couple of artifact videos for anybody that's been thinking about, the hot new game from Valve. It's pretty interesting, but don't worry, we're not going to cut off doing content for Final Fantasy, the trading card game. We know our roots, and we're still here, and we're here to stay. So thank you very much for tuning in, and subscribe if you like what we do, and we'll catch you guys next time.